So in the last video, I left you hanging. Goodness. I said basically that the Babylonian captivity, the first coming of Christ, and the second coming of Christ all have a striking similarity. They all have some things in common. What are those things? They all involve Jerusalem and its desolation. They all involve a temple and its desecration. They all involve the Jews and their preservation. They all include a group of people who will witness the beginning and the end of a biblically prophesied event. That is, a single generation of people will witness the whole thing. And they all include the symbol of the fig tree. So let's take a look at Jerusalem and its desolation first. And then we're going to look at the temple and its desecration, the preservation of the Jews, a group of witnesses, and finally the fig tree. So before the Babylonian exile, God sent prophets to the Jews and warned them that unless they changed their ways, that they would be taken captives. They would be Babylon would come in and take them into exile. And the problem that the Jews had at the time is a problem that we as Christians have, and I think that Israel may still have today. And that is, we think that because we have a corner on some kind of religious truth, that somehow or another God is obligated to do his best for us. So for the Jews living prior to the Babylonian captivity, they had the temple. They had Solomon's temple. And at one time, God's presence dwelt in that temple, and God's presence may still have been there in Solomon's temple. They had the ark, they had the rituals, they had the scriptures, the Torah, they had the patriarchs, they had all of that, and they thought because they had all of that, that they were always good, that somehow or another they would never have to be disciplined in any way. That God would not have to, in fact, use the worst form of discipline on them, and that would be exile, which for the Jews, being exiled is the worst thing that could happen. They couldn't imagine that God would, God lived there. Why would God want to take his people and put them somewhere else? They just couldn't imagine anything like that happening. And God knew that they were counting on the fact that they had the temple, they had the revelation that God had given them, and this personal relationship that God had with them, and they thought that was always good, and that they would never have anything bad happening to them because of that. Well, they were wrong. And so one of the things that they did was they didn't let the land rest. For 490 years, they didn't let the land rest. The land was due 70 years of Sabbath rest. And so God said that's how long they're going to be in captivity. They'll be in captivity or in exile for 70 years. So Nebuchadnezzar came in, he invaded, he destroyed Jerusalem, he deported the Jews into Babylon, and that was that. The unthinkable happened to the Jews. And in the last video, I read for you some of Daniel's prayer of contrition, his prayer of repentance, that would initiate God keeping his promise to the Jews, and that he would restore them back to the land again. And so once the Jews got back into the land, the exiles returned, they rebuilt the city, they rebuilt the temple. The second temple was in existence until the time of Christ, hundreds of years. It was embellished by King Herod, but basically the temple that Jesus went into was that second temple that the Jews rebuilt after the exile. The Jews knew that the Messiah would arrive, that he would be anointed, okay? And you have to be like 30-ish years old to be anointed. Jesus was about 30. So in that window of 30 plus years, it couldn't be less than 30. It had to be at least 30 years. Jesus came. Now, if you were to work the numbers forward, you would know when the Messiah would be coming. He'd be coming at the end of the 69th week, which would be the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel's 70 weeks of years. So right about AD 27. Now, if you do the math, you start subtracting years to know about when the Messiah would be born. Okay, you can kind of figure that out. And there were people, two people in particular, who realized that by the time the Messiah would be anointed, if you do the math and you do the subtraction and subtract 30-ish years, well, you could start looking for his arrival around 6 to 5 BC. And there was someone who was watching for the Messiah to come. That was the prophetess Anna. She was in the temple. She was 84 years old when Mary and Joseph brought Jesus into the temple. And she recognized him. She was told, the Spirit revealed to her that the Messiah had arrived. He'd been born. Now, Simeon had also been told by the Spirit of God that he wouldn't die until he'd seen the Lord's Christ. Now, we don't know how old Simeon was when he saw the Lord. We have no idea. He might have even been a young man, but he was probably an older man. He was probably an old guy. And he would have recognized the birth of the Messiah, that God was in the process of getting ready to confirm that covenant that he'd made. The Messiah had been born. Herod knew it too. So did the wise men. All of this was stuff that was transpiring within a time frame of about 80 years. All right. So if we take the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD and you subtract about 75 years, you will arrive at the birth of Christ. Bethlehem star, King Herod, the slaughter of the innocents, the arrival of John the Baptist, and actually Zechariah going in and offering the incense at the hour of incense and then coming out and not being able to talk until John was born, the forerunner of Christ. Jesus would arrive. He'd perform miracles. He'd raise people from the dead. He'd make the scribes and Pharisees and chief priests angry. The chief priests were jealous. They knew that if things went on the way they were going, as far as Jesus was concerned, that the whole world would follow after Jesus and they'd lose their position in the Roman hierarchy as being, big shots in the temple system at the time. A lot of people were fully aware of what was going on here during this generation. Okay, this generation that saw this. Jesus was cut off, he was excommunicated, he was crucified, and within the generation that saw the birth of Christ, Jerusalem would be sacked by the Romans. The temple would be destroyed, people would be dispersed. Thousands and thousands of people would die. And the rest of the Jews would be scattered among the nations, just like the prophets foretold. Now, Jesus is coming back. There's still 3.5 years left of that prophecy. And we know that Jerusalem during the end times is going to be trampled by the Gentiles. We're going to have more desolations in Jerusalem. Revelation 11 talks about that. Zechariah 14 talks about that, and Revelation 12 as well. So that's the desolations of Jerusalem. We have a pattern there about that from Babylon, from Jesus' first coming, and also Jesus' second coming. We know that when Jesus comes again, that Jerusalem will have to be reestablished, that the temple will have to be in place, and that the Jews will need to be in their land. So let's take a look at the temple and its desecration. Prior to the Babylonian exile, Solomon's temple was standing, and then it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and then it was rebuilt by the returning exiles. At Jesus' first coming, that second temple was still standing. It was embellished by Herod and then it was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. The third temple is going to be erected, and then it'll be defiled and desecrated by the man of sin, doing what we call the abomination of desolation. He will be the abomination who causes desolation. This person we refer to as the Antichrist. Daniel 9:27, Matthew 24:15, and 2 Thessalonians 2:3 and 4. The next item that these three time periods have in common is the preservation of the Jews. Okay, so during the Babylonian exile, we have 3 deportations of the Jews from Jerusalem. They were taken into Babylon, and they actually returned, but only a remnant returned. Okay, the remnant is the kind of an operative word here. There's only a remnant that returns back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city and rebuild the temple. And it wouldn't be until the Romans came in 70 AD that the Jews would be dispersed again, this time throughout the nations. However, and this is a most interesting thing, they would be preserved as a people group. Okay, and I'm going to talk about this more in another video because people have trouble with this, and they, there are Jews who say they are Jews but are not, and then there are the real descendants of Abraham, and then there are Jews who believe in Jesus who become part of this group we know of as the ecclesia, the church. So at Jesus' second coming, what we find is that the Jews will have been regathered already. And that's prophesied. Ezekiel 37 says that the Jews will be scattered like dry bones throughout the nations. And then the dry bones will be brought together and they'll be placed in their land. Okay, they don't have the Spirit yet. They're going to be placed back in their land again. They have to be brought back for the end time scenario to restart. And we know that once the end time scenario begins, that the Jews will be in rebellion. They're in rebellion right now. Jerusalem is again going to be destroyed. You see my little dog going back and forth back there. That's a little Brookie back there. She's wondering what I'm doing in here without her. Oh well. We know that Jews are going to be regathered back to the nation of Israel, back to the land of Israel, back to the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, not everybody who is brought back into the land is going to qualify as somebody who is a true descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and who is someone who is going to be a part of the millennial reign of Christ. Part of that remnant who will be brought into the wilderness. But what God did in establishing the current nation state of Israel was he allowed for the Jews, real Jews and fake Jews, however you want to see this, to be brought back to the land, to make Aliyah, to go back to that place, because it's from that place that Jesus is going to gather his remnant. He's going to choose a remnant from among this group of people who've been brought back to this place. That's the plan. We read about that in Revelation. Talks about the woman who flees into the wilderness, the remnant of Israel, and how she's going to be guided. We read about that actually in Matthew 24. And also in Zechariah 14. Jesus is going to arrive, split the Mount of Olives in two. There's going to be a way made for this remnant to flee through that opening. The people that Jesus wants to begin the millennial nation of Israel with. Okay, the group of people who will never ever rebel again. He's picking this group. They will be his treasure, his jewels, and they will follow him into the wilderness, and they'll be kept safe there for that last 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week. They will be preserved because God is in the business of preserving a remnant. And Jesus is going to confirm, he's going to continue confirming that covenant that God has with his people when he takes that remnant of Israel into the wilderness, where they will be safe until he returns at the end of 1,260 days. All right, that's the preservation of the Jews. Next, we have a group of witnesses, and I've already kind of touched on this. I'll just go over it real quickly here. That during the post-Babylonian exile, a group of exiles who'd been taken to Babylon returned to Jerusalem. The temple is rebuilt. And there are people who used to live in Jerusalem, who used to worship at Solomon's temple, who were taken into Babylon, who lived there for 70 years, who were brought back into Jerusalem, who saw the second temple. And in their estimation, when they compared Solomon's temple with the second temple, okay, they're old people at this time, they wept. There were people who were shouting for joy, and there were people whose hearts were torn apart by grief when they saw the second temple and compared it with the majesty of Solomon's temple. There was a generation of people who saw the whole thing, heard the warnings of the prophets, and were a part of the captives who went into Babylon, who lived in Babylon for 70 years, who were made aware of a decree. Let's go back to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple. They did. They saw, and they were stricken with grief and sadness. At Jesus' first coming, there were people who were expecting him, expecting to see this baby born around a certain period of time. Anna and Simeon, the wise men, and even Herod found out. We're supposed to be watching for the Messiah along about now. The star. There was the slaughter of the innocents as Herod tried to wipe out the king of the Jews who'd been born. And then you have Jesus arriving, being baptized, anointed by the Spirit at his baptism, probably on the Day of Atonement. He ministered and then was delivered up to be crucified. There were people who were alive, who heard Peter's preaching, who heard the preaching and teaching of the apostles, and maybe even the apostle Paul. Some people who were saved, some people who repented and became part of God's ecclesia. And then there were some who, when they saw the armies surrounding Jerusalem, fled Jerusalem. Believers who fled because they could see that the desolations of Jerusalem were about to happen. And then there were people who were driven into all parts of the world. They saw it all. A generation who saw it all. And at Jesus' second coming, there's a generation that's going to see it all too. One group of people who will be alive to see Israel's regathering, according to Ezekiel 37, from the nations that she'd been dispersed to, regathered. And this group of people will also see the return of Christ. And if they are of Israel, the cycle of rebellion will be broken. It'll be broken. Now, let's talk about the withered fig tree. Let's talk about the fig tree. And actually, it's withered twice. And on the third time that we see this fig tree, it's leafing out. Surprise, surprise. We see it leafing out. In Jeremiah, remember, he is a prophet who prophesied the coming exile for the Jews who did not repent. Jeremiah 8:13. I will take away their harvest, declares the Lord. There'll be no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree. Even the leaf will wither. Whatever I have given them will be lost to them. And here God is talking about the nation of Judah. He's talking about the Jews here, that there isn't going to be any fruit anymore. There aren't going to be any figs on the tree, and even the leaf will wither. Now, Jesus knew this passage. At the time he was living, it was echoes of the past, of another fig tree, another leaf withering, another tree that has no fruit. So there are two passages that I want to look at here. They're related passages. One is Matthew 21:18 and 19, where Jesus curses the fig tree. In the morning, as Jesus was returning to the city, he was hungry, and seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. "May you never ever bear fruit again," he said, and immediately the tree withered. It withered immediately, just like God said about the Jews at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, the Jews at the time of the first temple. He said, "Even the leaf will wither, whatever I have given them will be lost to them." They're going to lose it. And of course, the Jews in Jesus' day, they lost their place. They lost their temple. They lost their city. Here's the parable, Luke 13:6-8. Then Jesus told this parable. A man had a fig tree that was planted in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. So he said to the keeper of the vineyard, "Look, for the past 3 years, I've come to search for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Therefore, cut it down. Why should it use up the soil?" "Sir," the man replied, "leave it alone again this year until I dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears fruit next year, fine, but if not, you can cut it down." Jesus was using the example of the fig tree to tell the story of Israel, of how for 3.5 years, or 3 years, he'd been there looking for fruit. But there wasn't any. Well, at least not among the scribes and Pharisees and chief priests. There actually was fruit. His apostles and the disciples and the women who followed him, they would be the fruit that he was looking for, the fruit of the 4th year, which belonged to God. There should have been some fruit on this tree. After all the years of being there, taking up space in the land, there wasn't a single fig. Lots of leaves, but not a fig, not a single fig, not any fruit, with the exception of those people that I just mentioned. But national Israel bore no fruit. There was only a remnant, a group of people, a small group that would receive Christ as their Messiah, that would believe on his name and be the people that would be qualified as 4th year fruit that would be offered along with everything else on the day of Pentecost. Here's the fig tree when it comes to the end times. This is what Jesus said. Learn the lesson from the fig tree. A couple of lessons that can be learned from the fig tree. One is, if you don't bear fruit, you'll be cut down. And that's what happened with the people who were put in exile at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and that whatever had been given to them was lost to them. And it certainly was what was happening at the time of Jesus' first coming. And there is another lesson of the fig tree. There's a couple of lessons we learn here. As soon as its branches become tender and sprout leaves, you know that summer is near. So when you see a leaf appear on this tree, you can predict that something is about to happen with regard to Jesus' return. So also, when you see all these things, you will know that he is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have happened. Now, the Jews would have to be brought back into the land. They would have to have Jerusalem. There's a temple that still needs to be erected, but it's a tabernacle, it's a tent. The earthly temple always reflects the heavenly temple, always. And we can see that the heavenly temple is a tabernacle, and that is exactly what we're going to see erected. Not on the Temple Mount, because the third temple that's described in Revelation is connected with Mount Zion and not with the Temple Mount. So the Temple Mount is not important, because this end time third temple, which is a tabernacle, can be erected on Mount Zion. So we know that the temple will be erected, and we actually know who's going to do it, who's going to be setting up that temple, who's responsible for it. I've done videos on that. We know that there's going to be a remnant, and we know that there's a fig tree that's leafing out. And according to the promises that are given to the nation of Israel that are in Daniel chapter 9, God is going to confirm his covenant. He does it through Jesus. The first part of the confirmation of the covenant happened in the first century when Jesus came. The second half of Jesus confirming that covenant, and remember, the covenant's everlasting, but the confirmation will take 7 years. And that will start at the time that Jesus rescues the remnant of Israel and brings them into the wilderness. Now remember, Jesus is not looking for branches or leaves on that tree, that fig tree. He's looking for fruit, specifically the fruit of the 4th year, which is part of the first fruits offering. This belongs to God, and it is his portion. The scriptures tell us that there will be 4th year fruit, and that Israel's cycle of rebellion will be broken. It'll be broken at Christ's return. At his coming, first of all, for the remnant of Israel. And that's when they will start to begin the process of having fruit. And by the time he returns at the end of 3.5 years, Israel's rebellion will be over, and they will be a tree that bears fruit. The 144,000 of Israel, the remnant of Israel, will all be a part of a 4th year harvest for Christ. The generation that will not pass away is the same generation that will witness the regathering of Israel into her land. Against all logic and against historical precedent, but in fulfillment of prophecy, Israel was regathered to the land in 1947-48. And if the generational pattern holds, there will be some people living in Israel who will witness the whole end-time prophetic event from the time of Israel's regathering, from being scattered among the nations, until the return of Christ. The cohort of people who will not pass away may be well into their 80s when Jesus returns. The life expectancy in Israel right now is between 83 and 84 years of age. Israel only has 3.5 years left of their timeline. If we use the upper limit of the average life expectancy in Israel, that is 84 years, and we add it to 1948, then Christ would return no later than 2032, with the first rapture taking place no later than the fall of 2028. Jesus said that heaven and earth would pass away, but his words would not pass away. And even though the created world may pass away, and yes, we know that it will pass away eventually, it'll be burned up at the end of after the end of the millennium. Jesus' words are going to stand. Okay? They are immutable and unchangeable. And his words were meant to instill confidence in those of us who read those words and in those who hear those words. He will return. And it will happen the way that he said. He has the authority to make these kinds of statements because he has the power to carry them out. And nothing in all creation will prevent their fulfillment. In May of 2026, Israel will be 78 years old. And if the first rapture takes place in 2026, in the fall, then Israel would be 82 at the return of Christ. Biblical and historical patterns provide insight as to how future prophecy may play out. In the Olivet Discourse, Jesus connected several things together as a potential end-time pattern. The fig tree as a symbol of Israel, along with the generation that sees these things. The multiple desolations of Jerusalem, and the prophecy of the 70 weeks of years. We can expect that within the span of a single human lifetime, the world will witness the unfolding and fulfillment of prophecy, of end-time prophecy, from beginning to end. All right, so that's what I have for you, and I hope you'll leave a comment in the comments section. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you on another video. Till then, have a blessed day.